when you're giving feedback, like a lot of coaches ask for feedback, but then weaponize it. And so it's like, if you're going to ask for the feedback and weaponize it, you're never going to get good feedback again because nobody is going to be willing to be open about that anymore.
Welcome back to another episode of Beyond Coaching, and I'm ecstatic on the guest we have today. I have Becky Burleigh, who is now with What Drives Winning, who I've been a long time admirer of the work they've done. So I'm excited to dive into the conversation. Becky, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. I'm excited about this.
Cool. Well, you guys put out as good a stuff as there is in the industry, so I kind of picked the highlights that I've seen over the years for my questions today. But before I jump in, can you just share a little bit with everybody about your background and how you ended up doing the work you're doing now?
Yeah, I was a soccer coach for a very long time. I started 5 years at Barry College, which was NAIA when I started, what is now a D3 school. And then from there went to the University of Florida, and I was there at Florida for 27 years. And then at the spring of 21, I retired from coaching, or I thought I did. I did a short 6-month stint as a pro coach, interim pro coach for the NWSL, for the Orlando Pride, and then jumped into full-time working with Brett and What Drives Winning.
Cool. Well, in your work with Brett, I'm curious, what do you wish you would have known back when you were coaching that you feel like you've learned in this work you're doing now?
Oh my gosh, like I don't think we have enough time for the list. But what I would tell you is this, like it's crazy, the more you get outside of it and can look back, the more you're like, wow, I could have done that so much differently. But I would say if I had to pinpoint it to one thing, it would be about being a better question asker and finding ways to help engage my student athletes instead of just being a teller. Because I think as coaches, we can tell. We're really good at that. But I'm not sure how effective that is in terms of really internalizing those messages with those that we lead.
That's good. I'm curious. So one thing we do on this podcast and also in our impactful coaching project work is talk about coaching the 21st century athlete. Do you
Mhm.
questions-based leadership that you guys talk about, do you think that would have been effective 20 years ago, or do you think that's something we've evolved as a society to where it's effective now?
Well, I know 20 years ago, I was coaching then and not even playing, but like there was no one asking me questions when I was a player.
Me neither.
And I think there was just this model of what a coach looked like. And it was a very much of an authoritative figure who sort of just told you and you did it without any asking of any questions back. And, now today, like this generation, like they want to be collaborative. They want to understand the why. I don't think we even thought to ask the why back then. I think we just were like, oh, an authority person told you to do it, you do it. It was like a teacher or anybody in authority, a parent, you just did it. And I think this society now is so different compared to that. So would it have worked? It certainly would have been groundbreaking. I don't know. It would have been interesting to see how that would have evolved at that time.
Yeah, we talk about that a lot. I don't know if just all of us that end up in athletics, we admired our coaches, so just did whatever they said, or if that was the case. But the latest book to come out from What Drives Winning is called Questions-Based Coaching, right? Or Questions-Based Leadership?
Question-based leadership. Yep.
Leadership. Kind of give us an overview of that. And then I'm also curious for people listening, if they wanted to dip their toe into that style of leadership, what advice would you have for them?
Well, that book is a great place to start because, first of all, it is a super fast and easy read, and it has 52 question-based tools to kind of start conversations with. And I use this all the time. And, friends of mine now who are kind of used to this are using it with their kids, like they're using it in their families. And it's just a way of, again, like, if I tell you something, if I stand in front of you and talk at you, it's easy for you to sort of drift or have it go in one ear and out the other. If I ask a question, it immediately engages you. I mean, there's a reason like the Socratic method has been around since Socrates. And these questions, I think, really put some ownership back into those we lead's hands, and it helps us understand what it is they're thinking. And I think that is the biggest mystery in coaching right now is like if we try to coach based on like what we think should be, we grew up in a different era. We were athletes of a very, very different time. Even if you were an athlete 5 years ago, it's a different time. And so finding out what's inside their head is so valuable to a coach because you could be completely barking up the wrong tree with going with what's in your head.
So what does that look like, say, in a typical practice? I can see that in a classroom, side conversations.
Hmm.
Can you give us some practical looks of I'm running a practice with 30 soccer players. What how can we play out that style?
Yeah, absolutely. So like one of our warm-up activities would be what we call a rondo, which is basically like keeping possession in a smaller group. And so it's very easy to like stop the rondo and say, "Hey, this needs to be better, this," right? Or you could stop the rondo and say, "Okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, what would you guys give that?" A 7. Okay, if you had to go up or down, what would you pick? Because seven's a pretty vanilla answer. 6. What would make it closer to a 10? And then they give you the answers because they're going to say, we need more communication, or we're not moving off the ball well, or we're not looking over our shoulder before we receive. Like they're going to tell you the things that you want them to say, but they're having to access it themselves instead of you just talking at them.
Love it. We had a coach the other day, softball coach, who they were very good team, had a terrible 4 game stretch. And the coach sent them with pen and paper to watch all their at bats and why they swung, pitches they swung at, and ideas on how to get better. And she said she hadn't done that a lot and it worked miraculously well. It sounds similar to what you're describing.
I think it just gives back ownership to the athletes in terms of their own determination of what they want to be. You know, nobody wants to be a team that has a bad 4 game stretch. And so, how do you help them find those answers? Like, I'll tell you the one thing I have learned even more so, like, this is probably the best answer I could give you to the first question you asked me. Brett and I co taught a class for athletes at the University of Florida, and it was kids from all sports. And what I learned was all of them are experts in what they do. Like they've all been playing sports for so long. They're like the one percenters because they're at UF. They're clearly really good at what they do. And it's just so interesting to think that we're not using that intellectual capital if we don't ask questions.
I like that. I'd answer that question. So I spent a decade coaching college baseball before administration. And I'm answering a question you didn't ask me, forgive me. But I would say one, people aren't trying to mess up most of the time. I think coaches didn't personally
Exactly.
get mad. And then I think us in athletics, we spend a lot of time on stuff that doesn't matter. I think about, I mean, I would chart every pitch by every game during the game and then go back and do it after the game again. When if I was focusing on some bigger picture team dynamic stuff, I think my kids would enjoy the experience more and we probably would have been better. I got lost so far in the nuts and bolts that I think it led me to being worse at times.
And that's so interesting that you say that because and what you're thinking when you're the coach is like, I'm gonna leave no stone unturned. I'm gonna make sure I do everything to get this team to be as successful as possible. And what's coming out of that is like the minutia robs the joy. And so it's like, I'm not saying you can't pay attention to detail. Certainly the best coaches have that eye.
Absolutely.
But I also would say that, like, finding ways to keep the joy and to keep the motivation and the purpose of why you're playing alive is just as important.
Mhm. You said purpose there. If you're willing, dive into that a little bit of developing purpose within a team or even an individual player.
That's such a great question, and I think it's one that goes really unasked a lot, like, why did you get into this? Why do you play? Do you love playing your sport? How come it doesn't look like that? You know, like those are some questions that I think help people reconnect to their purpose because at a certain point, and to be frank, like I feel like that point is getting earlier and earlier in kids' careers,
Agreed.
it starts to feel like a job. And how do we find ways that like help them be, we call it like your backyard self, like when you're really just doing it for the love of it. And part of it is discovering or rediscovering is probably a better way to say it, your why.
Yeah, I had a conversation last semester with a kid, student athlete here at Friends, who I really, really liked, and they were just struggling with that purpose. Do they want to play? And I kind of said it sarcastically to the kid, but it rang true with him. Like, this isn't a jail. You don't have to do it, you know? But I think we
Mhm,
get
mm.
trapped in this identity piece of who I am as an athlete because of I've done it since I was 3, or, my parents have invested so much and they come to every game. I have to do it. And that's something we struggle with a lot here is how do we keep it fresh? And if a kid wants to be done, that's probably okay. You don't unbail at first sign of trouble, but sport is at our level, especially, is a activity you opt into. You don't have to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you wonder sometimes what the external forces are that cause that. We had this coaching lab recently at What Drives Winning. We run a coaching lab that's really fun. It's a great community. And one of the questions was, if you could put your mind on do not disturb, what would you what would you use the do not disturb button for? And I remember one of the coaches mentioned that one of their players would say, "Hey, maybe it's me, the coach," because what I'm saying helping or not? And, that's a tough reality to hear, but so real.
That's very real. How do you, yeah, I think that's probably more profound than you intended to be even. How do you find those feedback loops as a coach to knowing if it's you or not? Is there any mechanisms you used or that you've seen?
Well, I think part of it for us, like some simple things. We had the bench cam, and the bench cam. A lot of people think about that, and they think you're filming, your players on the bench. Well, the coaches were right in that frame too, and sometimes it was like cringeworthy to watch. Like, man, did I just act like that, or did I say that? And you can't argue with a video. So
Yeah.
it's like it kind of gives you a more clear picture. Another thing we've done with What Drives Winning that's really kind of fun and interesting is like if your kids were going to portray you on a TikTok, what us old people would say like charades, what would they say or what would they do? And of course, there's always, they're going to make it worse than it is, right? They're gonna, take your smallest traits and, enlarge them, but at the same time, it really shows you, like, what you're communicating in a kind of a fun way.
I love that. They're going to portray you on TikTok. I know. It's funny as I've gotten out of coaching. One thing I like about being out of it is I don't feel like I'm going back and apologizing to somebody once a week because I lost control of my emotions and did something I regret. It's so hard as a coach to stay under control just with the emotions involved. So
It is so hard, but it's such an important skill. I really think it's an underrated skill of coaches. And, we talk a lot, Brett works with some NBA players and teams. And it's so interesting when you watch an NBA coach, like they are the best people to watch in that space because or any pro coach, but you cannot react because if you react, you give ammunition to other players to not support a particular player. Or like the perfect example was the Andy Reid, Travis Kelsey issue at the Super Bowl. Like that could have changed the game. And instead, Andy Reid just handles that like a total pro, not because he's a professional coach, but the professional way he handled it, and it becomes a non-issue and maybe in some ways helps them win the game. But imagine if you were a college coach or a high school coach or a club coach and that same thing happened. And I'm not trying to excuse Kelsey's actions either, but what I'm saying is like how easy it would be to just really go back and fuel that fire and pour gas on it probably,
yep,
which then changes everything.
yep. Well, that leads me to my favorite thing ever heard you all say, and we've used it a lot in our athletic department. You said, paraphrasing, I think, but trust is won and lost in our reactions to moments that take us off guard. Um, and
Mhm.
one of your I saw it on one of your YouTubes. Talk about that and how you prepare to not lose trust in those moments.
Well, that's such a good question because, there's the idea that you can sort of master the predictable, right? So things that you know are going to happen. For example, in our sport, there's going to be bad weather at some game. There's going to be poor travel issues. There's going to be a player who gets pissed when they come out, right? Then when you sub them. And so it's like, can you master those things? Because there's going to be so many unpredictable things that happen that you can't prepare for. But when you can handle those unpredictable things, like Andy Reid did, in a way that's graceful and helpful to the environment, it can make a huge difference. When you don't, you really, really lose equity with your team. So, like, if I, completely have a meltdown on an official, and then I'm asking my team to be poised under pressure, that's kind of a tough message. It's like you're sending really big mixed signals there. And so I lose trust that I can't even do that. And I'm asking them to do that. And so it's like finding the way that you can model the behavior that you want.
Mhm. In some ways, it feels unfair, but yeah, I feel like in an AD role, I'm just praying that coaches don't have that moment that they can't come back from. And
That's a great point
yeah.
because it's like especially now like we talk about how social media has affected athletes but the same with coaches,
Mhm.
nobody wants to be remembered or known for their worst moment, and so if my worst moment happens to go viral, that's a job career killer,
Mhm.
all of the above. And sometimes that just comes from a lack of emotional control. Probably a lot of times it comes from a lack of emotional control. And so understanding like how to de-escalate yourself can help you understand how to de-escalate others.
That's well said. Um, so I'm going off script here, but I'm curious your thoughts. One thing I'm starting to become really attracted to is putting ourselves as coaches in a box in post game talks because I don't think kids retain much after a game, and there's so much
Mhm.
emotion. More likely, more hurt can be done than help. So we have a working theory here with a few of our programs of, hey, time it. Don't go longer than 2 minutes after a game because they're not going to
Mhm.
remember. You can circle back to anything you need to do tomorrow. What would be your thoughts on that?
Well, I like that idea because it forces you to be concise and not ramble,
Mhm.
which of course we as coaches have been known to do occasionally.
Once in a while.
um, every once in a while. But I think the other part of it is like, you know, I know how I'm feeling after a difficult outcome. And I know that the athletes are feeling that way too. And the question is, am I going to be able to deliver to the team what they need, or am I going to be offloading my own emotion? And I really feel like it takes a lot of awareness and self control to deliver what they need as opposed to just offload my own emotion. Because I think some coaches feel better when they vent and they let it out.
Mhm.
But what is the collateral damage with the rest of your group that that's been vented onto? And so it's like, how do you transcend the moment and give your team what they need is kind of what I try to think about in terms of the post-game talk.
I like that term of, are you offloading your emotion or are you essentially trying to be helpful to your team? So I can connect with that as a coach. It just, yeah, sometimes I showed them and told them I was upset. Now we're going to get better when it could be the exact opposite.
Mhm.
How do you, uh, there's a depth of character there, I feel like, of being able to, in the moment, not offload your emotion. Any thoughts on how you see coaches develop that emotional control and character over time?
One of the things that I've been really exploring a lot lately is trying to think about like what would my best self do in this moment? And not even in this moment, but like what does my best self look like? And trying to like really get clear, so clear that I can get to the point where I can say, "Hey, my best self is blank" in one sentence. And then sort of looking back and being able to uh grade, for lack of a better word, grade myself on how close did I come to being my best self, but without judgment. So, for example, if this particular game I was like 50%, okay, well, there's a learning opportunity for me to understand how to move that needle from 50 to 100. I'm not sure I'll ever get to 100, but can I stack some days where, I'm pretty high, like 80s, 90s? And what do those days have in common? And what do the days have in common when I'm not there? Like, do I have low bandwidth? Have I not eaten well or hydrated or slept well? Um, are there outside things that are taking my attention? Like, but really paying attention to the things that take us away from being our best self.
Yeah, that's good. I thought of something as you were talking that connected. Back when you were talking about NBA coaches, I remember reading something about Phil Jackson once, who was the longtime coach of the Bulls and then the Lakers after that, where if he felt like he wasn't making sound decisions, he'd check his heart rate. And if it was above a certain beats per minute, he'd sit down and just take deep breaths until it was back down so he could think clearly.
Well, what a self-awareness that
Yeah.
is, I love that. This sounds a little out there, but I'll just go with it anyway. Like, when I am coaching, if I'm sitting on the bench and I'm looking out of my eyes coaching, like, I think I'm a very direct participant in what's going on. When I can sort of have the view of watching myself, so it's almost like I'm sitting behind myself and I see the back of my head and I see what's going on the same way, but I actually see myself in the picture. I don't know, for me, for some reason, that little bit of separation gives me the clarity I need.
Hmm.
Like, I don't know why that is. I think it's like it just helps me have a little bit of a distance from the action, and that makes me feel like I can be a lot more rational.
I like that. That's good. That reminded me of I had a coaching friend once who baseball, where if he told his assistant coaches, if I'm getting on an umpire from this spot, it means I'm in control, this spot in the dugout. But if I'm anywhere else, it means I'm out of control and you come get me.
That's hilarious.
There's some awareness
That's
there.
actually a great idea. That's a great idea.
I thought it was ingenious. So one of those things was like, I wish I thought of that. Want to talk a little bit more about giving and receiving feedback. You guys just put out a great piece with the Baylor football coach, and really talking about restorative discipline and restorative
Mhm.
conversations. Can you kind of give everybody a summary of that? And then you or somebody used the term, it's a way to create a non-toxic environment while we're giving feedback. Just share some thoughts and give an overview of that, please.
Yeah, I think for a lot of coaches right now, feedback is like a minefield. They're afraid of it. There's a lot of coaches who are afraid to coach their team hard because of pushback from that. But I think that this idea about circles is which is part of restorative discipline. It's like, so a circle would be anybody that's involved in the issue that's gone on. So it could be like I'm having a beef with someone else on my team as a player. So the two players sit down, but like let's say the beef also affects my roommates or the people who are on the field that are close to us when we're having our beef on the field. Like, we can all sit down and sort of have our own point of view, but there's, like, rules for circles. So, for example, a lot of circles will have, like, what's called a talking piece. You could use a soccer ball. And so whoever's holding the ball has the floor, and you can't interrupt. You can pass the ball to someone, but then that person has the floor once they have the ball. And so it's just like a more, um, calm way of being able to discuss challenging topics. And then I think the second part is more about like when you're giving feedback, like a lot of coaches ask for feedback, but then weaponize it. And so it's like, if you're going to ask for the feedback and weaponize it, you're never going to get good feedback again because nobody is going to be willing to be open about that anymore. And so realizing how you're utilizing the feedback you're giving or you're getting is really important part of thinking about that. Like, you think about exit interviews. I think we had a video with Lisa Fortier, who's the Gonzaga women's basketball coach. And she was so honest because it's so true. She's like, yeah, we did our exit interviews. And I told my administrator, like, I really wanted to see it. And I started reading through it. And I'm like, well, I really only wanted to see the good parts. and so, and that's so relatable, so relatable. But it's like those other parts of the feedback. I think she said it so well. She's like, "That's more about what they need than about what I'm doing bad." So if they say, "We don't have enough communication," well, let's dig deeper in that. Like, are they super organized and they want to have their week planned before the week starts? And I'm not giving them that information until midweek. Like, what is it that they need? Not so much, what am I bad at?
Yeah, I like that. And it's yeah, there's a question in there of do you want to be right or do you want to be effective? And how do
That's
you be
my
effective?
favorite video I think that we've ever put out on What Drives Winning.
Yeah.
It's way back, maybe a year or so ago on Twitter, and it's actually with LeBron James.
Hmm.
And LeBron James is an amazing leader, by the way. But in this particular moment, one of his teammates gets a rebound and starts going the wrong way. And there's so many things that go wrong in these last few seconds of this game. And so clearly the teammate is in a shame storm of doing that, like going the wrong way, kind of messing up their opportunity to win the game. It's a playoff game too. They go to the bench in between because now the game is tied and they have to go into overtime. And they go to the bench and JR and LeBron are sitting right next to each other and do not say a word to each other the entire overtime break period. And it's clear that the only person who can like solve this situation is LeBron. And to be fair, like he has done everything in his power to win this game up to that point. He's scored like 40 plus points. He's pointing to the guy when he's going the wrong direction. He's trying to call a timeout. Like he has literally done everything. But then in that moment, he just cannot access the grace to get him off the hook, and they go into overtime, they lose, and then they end up getting swept in that series. And it's the title of that video is, "Do you want to be right or do you want to be effective?"
That's good stuff. I thought one more piece on this, the feedback and the circles. I thought one of the things that was most powerful about that video series you put out is it was a football coach from a Power Five school. And I thought it was just if at that level of athlete, that level of pressure and personality, that if they're doing it there's got to be something there. Um, how did they get into it? And I see it as almost a risk for them because it's the opposite of the macho football environment we envision.
Well, that's why I respect Dave Aranda so much. Like he is a teacher at heart, and he just has this amazing heart for changing people's lives. And so, like, is it more efficient to just use punishment with athletes? Some could argue yes. You could get fired for that at this point, but some could argue yes. Um, but how are you going to resolve disputes? How are you going to have standards? Like, and what I think Dave is really interested in doing is like, we want to have the highest of all high standards. I mean, this is a very high functioning football program, but we want to do it in a way that is collaborative and humanizes people and doesn't shame people. And I think that's very new to the athletic model.
Hmm. And how's his buy-in been with his players?
I think he's really, like, explained it well, and it fits Dave, it's like, if you know him, like, I think it fits his way of, like, managing people. Now, I think there's challenges when you're coming into a program and you've never been in an environment where it's been different.
Yeah.
Um, there's gonna be a learning curve for sure, but I think once people are in that environment, I think they really appreciate those differences.
Yeah. Right on. Cool. And shift gears one more time. We've alluded to this generation. I'm using hand quotes of athlete numerous times. Um, how many? How do you think this generation, and let's say Gen Z, born 2000 ish or later, um, how do you think this generation has changed from previous generations, and how do you think they're the same?
Well, people would ask me that all the time because of my longevity in my coaching career. Like, have kids changed? I'm like, well, of course kids have changed because parenting has changed. Social media has changed a lot of things. There's just so many environmental changes that it would be impossible for kids to not have changed. And I think part of that is just the lack of independence that kids have. I mean, I can remember as a young kid, my dad was a maintenance man, so he had tons of tools, right? And I mean, I'm pretty sure I was using, like, power tools, like, at age 10. And, like, could you imagine a parent letting their kid use power tools at
Somebody
age
might
10
call
right
the
now?
police on you.
Exactly, exactly. But, like, what that created was, like, in some ways, like, some self-confidence and self-efficacy that, like, I could actually use power tools and build stuff, and, it just gave you this sense of confidence that I think it's hard for kids of this generation to get because they're so protected from all those things. So how do you find ways to give them that, independence and that self-efficacy, but still within the realm of, like, maybe your kid shouldn't be using power tools unsupervised at age 10. So, like, but that's the difference, I think. It's like it's just such a the parenting is a whole different style. Like, we talked about this at the beginning with coaches and authority figures. Like, there was no room for back talk to your parents or to an authority figure unless you were prepared to deal with the consequences that were gonna come with that. So what I love about this generation is, like, they will push back against authority, and sometimes they have some amazing reasons and ideas of why they do that, if we would be willing to explore that and not just take it as, like, a pushback against us personally. And I think the access that kids have to information, like, I was back in, I'm dating myself now, but, like, the Encyclopedia Britannica days, you gotta look something up in a book. Now you get, like, the latest and greatest and most, recent information right in the palm of your hand in your phone. But there's danger in that too, because you have all this information without a whole lot of guidance to
Mhm.
help you deal with it. So there's just so many, differences in how we were raised as athletes in comparison to how these kids are raised as athletes or even as kids. And so, of course, you would expect that there would be massive changes in the way that we need to manage.
What do you, in what ways do you think they're the same, if any?
I think they're the same in the fact that they're still kids with tremendous work ethic, tremendous focus, tremendous willingness to put, like, everything into their sport. I don't think that's changed at all.
Mhm.
Does it look different because, whether it's like a pay for play model and less free play and all those kind of things? Potentially. But I think that I've seen some of the toughest kids that have come through in terms of, their ability to really be resilient and deal with hardships and setbacks. I mean, I don't think any of those human related issues have changed. It's just a matter of how do we help cultivate those when they've been protected from some of that before they get to us.
Right on. You hit on a concept we've been chewing on here of just coach competency, where
Mhm.
I think a coach, if you're not competent in today's day and age, you're just either flat out lazy because there's information is there, or you lack wisdom of knowing what the right information is. But I think a step further that gets hard for coaches is the access for student athletes to information. Oftentimes the best marketed story wins online. So I think coaches have the duty even to understand the bad information that's out there because kids are going to assume that's right, and being able to understand and teach towards that. Does that make sense? I'm curious your thoughts.
No, it does. We just had Mark Daignault, the Oklahoma City Thunder coach, in our UF classes. We teach master's level classes in coaching. And one of the things that he said just a couple of weeks ago that really stuck with me is, like, you've got to make your environment more compelling than the environment that they can get off their phone.
Yeah.
And that's a big challenge. Like, that's a lot easier said than done. But, like, there's just so much access to other voices, and, players have their swing coach and their,
Mhm.
fitness coach and their nutritionist, and, all these different things in their ear. And how do you add value? And I think that's, like, a great place to start for a coach, is, like, knowing what you're starting with, and then how do you add value to that? Like, that was a big lesson I learned even in my short stint as a pro coach, is, like, they don't really care what you know, except they want to know that you can add value to what they're already doing. And if you can do that, you're competent. And to your point, Rob, I think you make a really good one. It's like, if your only tool bag to deal with players is, from a management perspective, is punishment, and that is taken away from you, which it pretty much is in most environments now. what else are you going to do? Like, I mean, you can't just say, well, if I can't make them run, then how am I going to get them to do anything? Like, you got to find different ways. And that's the part where it's like, you also have to grow as a coach to understand that, coaching in a different way that's more acceptable in today's standards and society standards is your only way forward. And so that's where, like, even this question-based leadership that you mentioned, like, I think it's just a really big resource for so many coaches to think about how they could coach differently.
I love that frame of, I can't remember exactly how you said it, but your content and how you communicate needs to be more engaging than what they're finding online. That's
Mhm.
that's right on. Last question on this generation: how do coaches develop toughness with the modern athlete? Because we're talking about all these things that we perceive to used to build toughness, that we say we can't do anymore. So how do you build toughness?
Well, I think first you have to define toughness, and I actually had a coach recently come up to me and they were complaining. They're like, "Man, my team is just not tough. Like, we just lack toughness." And I'm like, So what does that mean to you?" You know? And so when you don't have a common definition of what toughness is, your group can't achieve what they don't know what it is. So if you think toughness is, grit, okay, what is grit? Like, you got to get specific. Like, what are the actionable items that are under toughness for you? And I don't think that's the same for every coach. Certainly it's going to look different for a golf coach than it might for a football coach. Maybe for a golf coach, the toughness is, how do you bounce back from a bogey to being able to, hit a birdie? For a football coach, maybe that toughness is like, you're staring across the line of a guy that's got 70 pounds on you and he's a senior and you're a freshman. How are you going to manage that physically? Like, so it's different. And to me, like, that's the key, is creating like a glossary of the terms that you use and how they are actually defined.
Yeah, right on. Cool. Well, this has been a fun, wide ranging discussion. We always wrap up with a rapid fire round. So I got 5 or 6
Let's
questions.
do it.
You have no longer than 30 seconds. I won't cut you off unless
Ooh.
it's a really good answer. So what's one thing that you want people to know or understand about what we've talked about today?
I think I would say questions are the answer, which is contradictory. But like, using questions is a way to unlock people. And that's the modern coaching right now.
What is the book or books you've given most as a gift and why?
Well, I'll just say I won't include the What Drives Winning books because that's just an unfair answer, but that would be the real answer. Besides that, I would probably say it's Untethered Soul by Michael Singer. And Mickey Singer is a local here in the Gainesville area. He's awesome. I'll just leave it at that.
Cool. I've never heard of that one. How has a failure or apparent failure set you up for later success?
Every single time. Because basically, if you're looking at those failures as an opportunity to grow, then you can't even not want them. You kind of want them to bump up against your edge.
Yeah. Other than this one, what's your favorite podcast?
Hmm. Hidden Brain. It's an NPR podcast that covers a wide variety of topics. Hidden Brain.
Okay, two-part question here. I want you to answer from your coaching years and then from your current work. So, how do you
Okay.
define success in your work?
From my coaching years, it would probably be back to the, did I add value to that person in their 4 years or however many years they spent at the University of Florida and beyond. In my current work, it's probably to help provide resources that I was a very young head coach and I was lucky to have a lot of people supporting me. And that's hard to find and hard to ask for. I hope that my current work would be successful if people would say, this has been a resource for me as I navigated the challenges of coaching.
Cool. Last one. In the last 5 years, what new belief, behavior, or habit has most improved your life?
Honestly, I would say the practice of asking better questions because I certainly was a world-class teller. Maybe not even world-class, but I was a teller for sure. And being able to ask better questions, I think has enhanced my relationships all around.
Right on. And I think there's a book you guys have put out on that topic.
There you go. Well, question-based leadership,
There we
go
go.
get it.
Well, thanks so much for the conversation today. I think it'll be really helpful to coaches, and I've certainly enjoyed it.
Yeah, this was great. Rob, you had some great questions, so thanks for including me.
Cool. And for those listening, we'll put an email address for Becky that you can get in touch with her if you want further questions and learn more about what they're doing. So, Becky, thanks. We'll wrap up here. Thank you for listening to another episode of Beyond Coaching. Beyond Coaching is a podcast developed and produced by the Impactful Coaching Project with the support of Friends University. The Impactful Coaching Project seeks to develop coaches that coach the whole person and is the thought leader in coaching the 21st century athlete. The Impactful Coaching Project produces training, information, and research to help coaches improve. To see more information, go to impactfulcoachingproject.substack.com. Thank you.